You noticed the silence before you ever questioned it. Not the loud kind, not the dramatic kind. The subtle absence that settles in when your phone stays dark longer than it should, and your body already knows why before your mind catches up. That pause where you almost check, then don't, because some part of you is already certain there's nothing waiting. That thought wasn't supposed to surface. It usually stays buried beneath distraction. Tonight, it didn't. At first, you explained it away with logic. People get busy, lives branch off, time compresses. You told yourself this was adulthood, maturity, independence. You even felt a quiet pride in how little you seemed to need anyone. But independence doesn't feel hollow. It doesn't echo back at you when you move through a room alone. This felt different. This felt like something had slowly stopped responding. You began noticing small inconsistencies, how conversations felt shorter, thinner, like they ended before arriving anywhere. How you'd replay things you said, not because they were wrong, but because they felt oddly neutral, as if you were speaking from a script you didn't remember memorizing. You laughed when expected, you nodded at the right moments, and afterward, you couldn't remember how it felt to be there. There's a specific unease that comes from realizing you're observing yourself live, watching your expressions form, adjusting your tone mid-sentence, evaluating reactions instead of experiencing them. It's not anxiety, it's distance, a clean, quiet separation between what happens and what you feel about it. That's when the intrusive thought slipped in, soft, precise. What if they stopped visiting because there's nothing left to reach? You didn't sit with that thought. You learned long ago how to redirect yourself, how to stay functional. You kept routines intact. You stayed productive. You showed up where required. But sometimes you'd freeze in a familiar space and feel unfamiliar inside it, like the environment remembered you better than you remembered yourself. You weren't sad. Sadness would have been easier. Sadness has weight. This was lighter, almost efficient. Your emotions arrived late, if at all. By the time something registered, it no longer demanded expression. That delay became your normal, and without noticing, detachment took root. You told yourself you were just tired, burned out, overstimulated by everything. But burnout doesn't explain why your reflection sometimes looks like it's waiting for permission to move. This wasn't depletion, it was adaptation. Your mind learned something quietly and early. Unpredictability hurts, closeness carries risk, relaxation invites surprise. So the survival brain stepped forward, not to protect you dramatically, but efficiently. It didn't flood you with fear. It replaced feeling with monitoring, scanning instead of connecting, preparing instead of participating. You became controlled, polished, emotionally economical. You shared enough to seem open, but never enough to be touched, and people sensed that before you named it. Conversations stopped deepening, visits shortened, invitations slowed, not because you were unpleasant, but because you weren't reachable. The survival brain doesn't isolate you with force. It makes you subtly unavailable. You listen without absorbing. You speak without revealing. You're present without arriving. Over time, others feel there's nothing to rest against. No emotional return, no resonance. So they drift without blame, without explanation, and you call it preference. Here's what your mind avoids admitting. No one abandoned you. They couldn't find you. There's a part of your brain that was never meant to be conscious, ancient, fast, pattern obsessed. Most people never notice it running in the background, but you did. You saw the door, and once it was seen, it couldn't be unseen. That awareness changed the structure. Thoughts began watching themselves. Emotions became data. Fear stopped being a feeling and became a system. You didn't break, you were overseen. Now, intimacy feels like exposure, spontaneity like danger, stillness like threat, so distance feels like safety. This part of you doesn't need panic to control you. It prefers neutrality. Numbness feels stable. Isolation feels efficient. Silence feels manageable. That's why it's convincing. Nothing feels wrong enough to escape. Everything feels just quiet enough to stay. You can't fight this part of you. Resistance feeds it. Control confirms its purpose. The shift happens somewhere colder and quieter, in awareness without obedience, in letting the alarm sound without moving, in sitting with fear without translating it into avoidance. Perception becomes leverage. But understand this: when that grip loosens, relief won't come first. Exposure will. Unfiltered emotion doesn't arrive gently. Connection won't feel comforting. It will feel invasive. And if people begin finding their way back, if the silence breaks and the room feels occupied again, will you recognize who they're finally seeing?